grew up in a little German town, Herman, Missouri. It's on the Missouri River. It's quite noted for its German ancestry, and it has really celebrated it and become quite a tourist site now. It's very scenic and looks a lot like the Rhineland in Germany, and consequently there was one winery there, started way back when. They closed during Prohibition, and then it reopened in the 60s. And since then, and since tourism has picked up, there are about 4 wineries there now. So it attracts a lot of people out of St. Louis and the surrounding area. But then I went to school at Central Missouri State. It was college then. Now it's turned into university, and now it's got another name. It's to sound more impressive. But at any rate, it's at Warrensburg, Missouri. And the reason my father sent me there, although it would have been closer to go to Missouri University, back when I was going to school, we didn't have automobiles available to us, and he didn't want to have to drive too far to take me to school, and the train stopped in my hometown, and so I could get on the train and take it all the way to Warrensburg and get off there. It's about a 3.5-hour drive. I can remember the train trip cost $8.50, and that seemed like a fortune at the time. Just goes to show how everything's relative. I graduated from Central Missouri State in 1953, and then I taught with a degree in home economics, vocational education. And then I taught for 4 years in a small rural school in Concordia, Missouri, a strong Lutheran town. I was married right after I graduated. My husband still had a year of school left, and he finished, and then we stayed there for about 6 years. He was a history teacher and social studies. Actually, he had a geography major, but they didn't hire a full-time geography teacher, so he taught geography along with all the social sciences. And then we moved. He got a position teaching at the high school in Warrensburg, and that was about 30 miles away. So we moved back to Warrensburg when he had graduated from there too. By that time, he had a master's degree, and so we lived there. And after we were there about a year, I'd had one child at that point. I had a little girl, and I started. There was an opening in the junior high, and I started teaching junior high home economics at Warrensburg, and I did that for 16 years. He taught about 5 years, maybe 6 years at the high school, and then he went to the university there and was a history professor at the university until his health declined, and we had 3 children at that point, and he passed away then in 1974. Took a leave of absence and just never recovered. And that's when, before he passed away, he and I talked about it, and we decided that I should go ahead and finish another degree. So by that time I had my master's, but I should go on and work on a PhD, which I had started before he passed away, but then waited a couple of years until my oldest daughter was a senior and had graduated from high school, and we moved to Columbia, University of Missouri, and stayed there 2 years. She went to school. My son is about 5 years younger than she is, and then my youngest daughter is 10 years younger than my oldest daughter, and so they enrolled them both in school at Columbia, and I went ahead and stayed there for 2 years and finished the PhD. And then I started interviewing for jobs, and I ended up here at Western in 1978. And the 2 younger children moved here with me, and both of them graduated from high school. And I was in what it was then called the Home Economics Department. And I was faculty. I was hired here primarily to help prepare teachers, home economics teachers. And that's what my PhD was, in home economics education, which is a vocational area also. But after 4 years, I became chair of the department, and I chaired the department from 1982 to 1990. And I joined the organization, shortly after I came. I can't remember exactly the year, but I would say, within a year or so, I tended to get involved in things, so I joined that organization. And I was always very supportive of what the women were doing. I had heard some really interesting stories, and I don't know if you've gotten any of these or not. When I came in, after I became chair, I got well acquainted with Beth Stifler, Mrs. Stifler, and she was chairing the English department at that point. And I don't know if you heard of her or not, but she was quite a lady. And she really was. She was just a really nice person, and just very tactfully could deal with the faculty and the students and everything. And she told me some very interesting stories during the 70s, well, in the 60s and 70s, because she'd been at Western a long time. And now, see, I came in 78, and by that time the campus was unionized. They had brought the union in 2 or 3 years prior to that. I can't say exactly, 75, 76, something like that. And I know a lot of our home economics. Now, remember, home economics department is an all-women's department. We did have, which makes it different than any other. The only other department on campus at that time that was all women was women's physical education, because physical education wasn't combined with men's physical education until sometime in the 80s. And the faculty, of our faculty, and there were about 16 of them at that point, 4 of them were international faculty. We had 2 Pakistanis, an Indian, and an Egyptian faculty member, all fluent in English. I mean, there was never, at least I never had any trouble understanding. I'd have students sometimes complain about the Egyptian lady, but they just needed to listen, because she spoke fluent English. Anyway, they would tell me stories about how hard it was for the women on campus prior to them organizing, with organizing. Beth told me that they called a meeting, and this must have been early 70s, maybe 72. And I've heard Betty Casper talk about this too. She's another one who was she's in her 80s now, but she was very influential in women's study. Did something with women's studies. She was down in the education department too, but they were both telling me about how women on campus, first of all, there weren't a lot of PhD. There weren't a lot of women with doctorates at that point. And there were some. And they called all the women who were faculty together in this one room. And our department is still in Knobloch Hall. The department today is called Dietetics, Fashion Merchandising, and Hospitality.
Department is in Knobloch.
Yeah.
And you said it's called what?
Dietetics. Fashion Merchandising. And Hospitality. And there's letters that they use for that. And Dr. Karen Greathouse is the chair of that department at this point.
Karen Greathouse.
And she's been there about 20 years, too. And anyway, maybe she's been there longer than that now. I guess she's been there about 20. She came in about 1990, so time gets by. It's 22 years now. But at any rate, they said they called everybody together in this one big room. And Beth and I don't know who else was leading the meeting, and they asked for all the women who were full professors to stand up, and nobody stood up. There wasn't a one in the room that had attained the rank of full professor. To make a long story short, in the end, there was only a handful that had even migrated to like assistant and associate. Most of them were at the lowest level or instructor level. A lot of them assistant, but they just weren't being given the opportunities, and they were being passed over for even the work that they did. It was women, and it was very credible, so they just didn't get a chance. Well, when the union came, I guess in the meantime, they went to the president at that time, and I think the president must have been pretty receptive in helping do some things about it. Actually, some of that started back in the late 60s. Betty Casper tells us about this. They got the Women's Studies program started at that point, I think. But at any rate, when I came even, they were in the process. We were unionized, and we were in the process of every department had to write their criteria for tenure and promotion, which on campus is a big thing. I mean, if you don't get tenured on campus, you don't get to stay. And you've got to meet certain criteria. And usually it starts with whatever the terminal degree would be, meaning the degree that's acceptable. Like in fine arts, it might be an MFA, Master of Fine Arts. But in most of our programs, it was either a PhD or an EDD, which is either one is a doctorate. And there were people available who could do those things. A lot of the people in my department had come in with master's degrees, and during the 70s went back to school and finished PhDs. They didn't have it at that point, but they began to see the need. I had mine finished when I came in because I knew from my husband being on campus at Central Missouri State, there wasn't any point in me going to a campus without having that finished. And so I wasn't quite finished when I was what you call ABD when I came here, all but dissertation completed. And I finished that at the end of the first year. I had my dissertation started, but I had to defend my dissertation the following summer, and I graduated then. And one of the things that we did with the union was write the criteria, and then it had to be approved up the line by administrators and so forth. But it's kind of like the syllabus. See, students today regard the syllabus as kind of a contract between you and the teacher, because what's on the syllabus tells you what's expected of you from the class. And if something's not on the syllabus and you get marked down on your grade because you didn't do it, you have an arguable point as to what your grade is if you don't meet. Well, that didn't used to be the case. I never took early years of class, so I would tell you that. The teacher could change their mind in a whim, add something else or something. Well,
excuse me for 1 second. It says y'all can leave without me. Y'all can leave without me. Go ahead. It's definitely just call me later on tonight.
Well, she can sit in on this if she wants to. Hi, bro. You might learn a thing or two too.
Catch y'all later.
At any rate, when we wrote the contract, it was very specific. It was like a syllabus. It told you exactly. There were still some judgmental kinds of things in it, but it laid out more specifically what was expected to attain tenure, and as you went along, what you needed to be an assistant professor, an associate professor, and so you had a legal document that you could use to try to justify. Now, I was always surprised at the number of faculty who would come in and didn't pay much attention to it. I guess new faculty, it was kind of hard for them to recognize how important it was, and then they'd be surprised if they were put on warning, about it, because it very specifically said what you needed to do. And it wasn't always easy to do that and teach 4 classes at the same time and maybe sponsor an organization or, do all the rest of the things you had to do. But at any rate, I think the WOW organization really gained its status as a leadership group during the 70s. Really strongly during the 70s. And I was president of, I was trying to remember, I was president of WOW one year, and I can't remember the exact year. I know Janine, the Women's Center director, was here by that time, and she was fairly new, that maybe a year or two. I probably was president around 1994, 95, 96, somewhere in there. I retired in 1998, so I know it was prior to that, a few years, and I can't remember exactly.
You said you retired in 1998?
I did, yeah. I've been retired 14 years. This summer, it'll be 14 in July. And the one thing I remember accomplishing, I don't doubt if anybody else remembers this, but the radio station here, WIUM, the public radio station, the NPR station, National Public Radio, wanted to have a program for women, but the only time slot they had available was at noon. And in order to have that, we had to pay. It had to be sponsored, and you had to come up with some money to pay for it. And we didn't have lots of money as an organization, and I know some of the board didn't feel like we should spend the token amount of money we had for that, but I felt it was an important thing for the whole community to listen to, because the program would always be on women's issues. And so I suggested that we just send out a memo asking for contributions from members to see how many would like to give some money towards sponsoring it. And we got more than enough money in contributions to sponsor it. And it has remained on the air and is still on the air from 12 to 1 on Friday, or 12 to 12:30 on Fridays. And I'm assuming that they probably still sponsor it financially. I don't know how they do it now. Maybe they have enough money now that they don't have to worry about taking donations for it.
How do you what were some of the things that WOW did to kind of gain strength within themselves?
I think by the time I came in, I think they met with administrators. They put more of a public face on what women were doing on campus. They were advocates for the Women's Center. In the beginning, the location for the Women's Center was just like a hole in the wall. It was just one little, it wasn't very great. And they pressured for a better spot. Of course, it's in a really nice place now with the renovation of that building and everything. But for years, I was trying to think if Janine was over at, was she in Brown Hall, or I can't remember where that Women's Center was located prior to that. And you probably wouldn't know that either, because it's probably been where it is now since you've been on campus. Because they remodeled that building probably about 5 years ago. It's a fairly recent remodel. It's a very, very lovely building now. And we always had an annual or a spring banquet, or it wasn't a banquet, it was a spring luncheon. And they would honor at least one, sometimes two, but usually one person for outstanding contributions that they'd made. And, different years it would be different persons. One other thing I remember them doing is sponsoring a series of brown bag luncheons, having women in research, where women on campus could present their research to other people and to anybody who wanted to come. Gave them a platform or an opportunity to do that. And usually it could have been anybody, but lots of times it was new faculty who had done their dissertation research and wanted an opportunity to tell other people, share it. But then some of it was other faculty. Maybe they had a sabbatical and been working on something and came back. And I know that, it seems to me that was kind of initiated during the 90s. I just think visibility was enhanced because they were just more vocal and had a group behind them to help support them in what they were doing. And then I think the administrators that came in were probably more open-minded and recognized women were becoming. There were more college women going to, attending college, and there were more PhDs that were women that were entering professional jobs like that. That you see, after the 70s, that's true of after the civil rights issue and after the women's issues in the 60s and the 70s, people became more open-minded about hiring. But again, you had to meet the credentials and so forth that were required there. And so I think women had more opportunities because nationally the emphasis was on recognizing the value of different people in our society. A lot of that's happened during my adult lifetime. I can tell you some funny stories, or not funny stories, but I was talking to a friend of mine who's retired out of, it used to be Ed Foundations, and now I think it's Educational Leadership and something else. And she chaired that department after a while too, but she'd been in there. Well, she started as just at a lecture status in the 60s, and then eventually worked her way up. But she said she used to go to board or faculty meetings, and most of the men were in education were men, and they called her their Girl Friday because she could bring them the coffee and things like that. She was telling about that, and I said, well, as far as I was concerned, the only time I really felt personally that I wasn't intimidated necessarily, but felt like my voice wasn't heard at the same level as other people. During that period of time that I chaired the department, we had a different administrative setup on campus. There was a separate college called the College of Applied Sciences. And in that college was my department, home economics, agriculture, industrial tech, and I don't know what it goes by now. It has is it industrial engineering or something, but that was the department. Let's see, law enforcement, computer science, and ROTC. And that was those were all departments within that college. And of course most of those are male departments. And I was the only female chair on the board or on our group, and I can remember I'd make a suggestion or we'd be talking and I'd say something, and it was just kind of like I hadn't said anything at all. It was just kind of go on. Pretty soon somebody else would say the same thing. Well, that's a really good idea. It just became obvious, to me that it was partly because I was a woman and I couldn't possibly have a good idea. So after a little while, it would come around, somebody else would say it was a good idea. And I've heard other women say, too, that if they really want something done, they'd tell some guy that they wanted they thought that they talking about it, didn't let them bring it up, and it would be more acceptable.
Art of persuasion.
Now I don't know if that has changed a whole lot. Some things don't change as fast as you'd like for them to, but that was one of the things. But as far as being treated poorly on campus, or the only thing in my whole career that I ever remember that this really irritated me, early on when I got my job at Warrensburg teaching at the junior high, the superintendent called me in, and they were hiring, they were starting, well actually they went to a split schedule because they couldn't get a bond issue passed and build a separate school for the high school. So we had to share the building and we had split hours. And so they were hiring another home ec teacher. And he called me in and he said, we're going to hire you because we want to keep your husband. We want him to stay here. I didn't say anything, but I thought, I've gotten all the rest of the time. I've always gotten a job on my own qualifications. And I really don't need that, but I want this job, so I'm not going to say it. But, nobody, I don't think anybody would be that blatant today about things. He didn't know any better, I guess. Or he didn't care.
Man, that was crazy.
That things have changed, yeah. And I can remember, too, during the 60s, women... Well, whenever we became pregnant, and I had 2 children while I was teaching junior high, we had to retire, or we either retire or take a leave of absence. I was fortunate enough they gave me a leave of absence, but some people, they just didn't let them teach anymore. And I always thought that was kind of funny in home economics that being pregnant was something really bad and the girls shouldn't know about, but we'd have to quit and take a leave of absence until we'd had the baby, and then we could come back if we wanted to. So those things have changed. Couldn't wear pants in the classroom until the 70s.
Because my grandmother used to tell me
I'm sure your grandmother can tell you stories about that,
especially
too.
Like in church and stuff.
Oh, well, heavens no. We never wore. That took even longer to wear pants to church. During the 60s, you had to have your hat. But I can remember we were very brazen. We wore pantsuits to we had workshop meetings one day, and a whole bunch of us decided we were just going to come in pantsuits. Nobody said anything except the secretary to the superintendent. She just thought it was terrible. Those are funny things when you look back about how we break barriers.
Right. That's really cool, though. That's really cool.
It's hard for people today to imagine some of that. And, with the politics, the way it's going today, a lot of those issues that women fought so hard for, the right to make your own decisions about abortion and that sort of thing. The right to vote. Can you imagine not giving people the right to vote?
Most people don't take advantage of that anyway, but
they just don't realize it.
Yeah, they don't.
I have never, I think in all my life, I've only missed one opportunity to vote. Even if it's if I went last Tuesday, there wasn't anything particularly that I'm not Republican, so I wasn't voting for either one of those candidates or any of those candidates, but I always think it's a privilege and we should do it whenever we have the opportunity. I think it's important. I think it's important to be informed about what you're trying to do. I try to read and listen and ask questions and go to sources of information. But, if you don't take responsibility for what's happening around you, you don't have any right to complain.
True.
Any other questions you have? Or have I given you more than you need?
You pretty much gave me a lot of stuff. Yeah, you pretty much go through a couple of my questions. You pretty much gave me everything that I really needed as far as things about the organization. What about what was campus like back then?
Okay. Well, I think probably the big change, and it had started to change right after I got here, was the size of the campus. And this was true in most state schools. Like when I went to Central Missouri State in Lawrenceburg, it was a school of about 1,500 students, fairly small campus. And Western was the same, very similar. And it wasn't until the 60s when you get this crop of baby boomers ready to come to college, and college became more accessible for people, that's when all the residence halls started being built, and the campus expanded. And I think the year or two before I came to Western, I think maybe about 76, 77, they hit their peak here. And I thought they told me they had 14,000 students on campus at that time. And about the same number of residence halls. I don't recall, there's been renovation in residence halls, but all the residence halls that are there now were there when I came in 78. They were all built from about 1963 to 1975 or 76, I think. So rapid expansion. And the thing that has changed a lot in recent years is the off-campus teaching, the Quad City campus particularly here for Western. And I think it has grown quite a bit because it's more convenient for people living in that area to attend campus closer to their homes. During my period of, those 20 years I was here, there were a number of us at different times commuted back and forth to the Quad Cities to teach a class at night. I did that several times, and a lot of other people on campus did the same thing. And then trying to think other changes.
As far as are you familiar with the Wheeler Block Party?
Or yeah, I've read a lot about it.
Okay, did they have events back back?
Well, there was always partying, and Western was known as, the reputation they had. It got so bad at graduation that we had I can remember when, our president was Malpass at the time, and he wasn't helping matters any, because at graduation he would get up and say things about, you'll remember those warm afternoons out at Lake Argyle, and when, things like that. And it was bad enough that kids would come to graduation with liquor under their gowns, and when the college of two departments that were the worst was law enforcement and different business departments, and they would literally pop champagne corks after they went down and after they went up and got their piece of paper, which wasn't ever their diploma, but it was a scroll of the university usually, and they'd be popping them in the gym or out. And then the last time we had it, I think that was the year my son graduated. That would have been 80. He was 84, I guess, 84 or 85. We had it outside in the football stadium. And we had, I can't remember the man's name, but we had a renowned speaker who was a journalist and gave the evening news and things like that. And we were very fortunate to have gotten him. And the kids were so carried away that they were doing the wave out there back, and while he's speaking, they're just carrying on. And a lot of us just said, this has got to stop. There's got to be a way to keep this under control. And so that was the last time we had an outdoor one. Of course, it was always kind of chancy having it outdoors because you never knew if it was going to rain or anything. And then we started having it down in Western Hall. And then they started splitting it because the commencement classes were so large and so many people wanted in to see them, So they started splitting it and having certain colleges in the morning and the others in the afternoon. And then they got, after a few years, and I don't remember when, by 1990, after Malpass left, for sure, they started frisking them at the door. But, if they had a bottle with them, they confiscated it before they got in there and told them they could do their partying afterwards. But as far as big block, there were always kids. On a warm Friday evening after classes in the spring, you'd see them congregated around different houses, where they lived and so forth, having, they were drinking beer and probably barbecuing and having a good time. I don't ever remember huge block parties like they had trouble with, though. There was always a little bit of that. Kids are kids, but it wasn't. There's always a problem in crowd control when you have huge numbers of people. I think that's where a lot of the trouble gets. And of course,
alcohol.
You get that combination together. I think every university deals with some of that, but I think part of the perception, and one of the things they tried to get rid of here at Western was that, when I was there anyway, was the idea of us being a party school. Well, party school sounds good to the kids, but we wanted to be better known as an academic school that put out good graduates who could do the job when they graduated. That was more critical. That's a good question, though. And my take on this is you will always have to take those things into consideration and always have to have some things in place to discourage that kind of thing. Because every time you get one bunch of kids educated to what they're not going to get to do, you get a new crop in. And it starts all over again. It's never a done deal. So.
True. I feel like most of the problem comes from, even with like the big block parties and stuff like that, is that the school or just like the surrounding authorities trying to have too much control over it. Like,
well, they're afraid of what's going to happen, and so consequently they come in too hard-handed.
And then stuff gets reckless. Like this, I don't know if you heard about last year.
Yes, everybody in town knew about that one because it was all over the paper.
It's just like, I feel like once the whole, when you're at this age, the college age, it's more so like a rebellion thing.
Oh, sure.
And if you give people like the right, you say like, okay, you can drink on campus, the reality is most people are not going to do it, because it's like they're going to rebel and not do it because it's accepted. And I don't know, like a lot of people kind of go against that. Like,
I'm not sure I'd go quite that far with you. I tell you why. I remember my youngest daughter went to Iowa State to school, and you don't remember this because you're too young, but they changed the drinking age. They lowered it to 18 for a while, and Illinois raised theirs several years before that. But Iowa raised their drinking age back to 21 the year that she entered freshman year out there. And she said, they were just so upset. The kids were so upset about that. But she said that there was so much. She said those kids were just, they would walk down to the bars and wherever they had to go, and she said they were just such a mess. They were getting sick on the way home and just everything. But she said that everything was in excess. She noticed that. And she'd lived here, so she had seen the kids here. And she said they partied here, but never to the same extent that they were doing out at Iowa State. And they have a big spring thing called Bisha, sometime in the spring of the year. They finally canceled that altogether because it got so out of hand. Southern Illinois University used to have a big Halloween bash. They finally started having, and I don't know if they still do this or not, they have a fall break over Halloween, so the kids aren't on campus.
So bad.
Because I can remember down in Southern, in Carbondale, it got so bad that they were rolling over cars and setting them on fire, and really out of hand, really bad things.
That's just extra.
So again, you try to figure out how to what you can do up front so things don't get to that point. And if you have some students who are more willing to help keep it under control, you're more likely to do it. But you're right, when they're confronted with things. It's like I taught junior high for almost 16 years. And talk about a rebellious age group. That was an age group, I always said, you could lead them to do almost anything. But if you drew a line in the sand, you wanted to be on their side, because if they started pushing back, you didn't have a chance. So I always found humor worked a whole lot better with that sort of thing than getting mad or getting angry or loud words and things like that.
True. I mean, really, all you got to do, because I taught a few. I used to teach poetry classes in my high school.
Okay.
And really, like, I taught like the kids with like the ADHD and stuff, like learning disabilities. And what I found was that, like, me personally, my presence with the kids, like, they respect me because I went to the school, so they kind of know, like, my reputation.
And they figured you were one of them.
Exactly. And then it's like, I was friends with them, but not too friendly.
Right, exactly.
Too friendly. And I always had at least 1 or 2 or 3 influential students within the classroom on my side. So it's like they'll hear what I'm saying and they'll, all right, guys, chill out.
Exactly.
Class under control.
And see, that's exactly what needs to happen over here. And I do think that they put some. It'll be interesting to see how things go this year. It seems as though nobody really had responsibility for that, or they didn't have they didn't take out some kind of whatever you have to take, a permission or something of that sort. Nobody had signed for the kegs. I mean, there was nobody saying, okay, this is my party and you all are coming. This is anybody's party. Anybody comes, anybody can do what they want to. You got problems when you do that.
True.
So I hope that I hope it goes better this year.
Oh yeah, definitely. And they need to like train their SWAT team better as well.
Well, I gathered that from what I'd read.
Oh, it was so crazy. Like, I was sitting in the middle of it, and this dude had like ran up behind me and threw like a gallon wine bottle like at a police officer. I'm like, okay, now if he comes and arrests me for that, I'm gonna be really mad.
Yeah.
And it was like a whole bunch of stuff.
And
like they were pepper spraying people that weren't even doing anything.
Right.
And it was just crazy. Like the police officers took it way out of hand.
They took it too far.
They took it way too far.
Well, they probably got scared of, fear causes people to do a lot of things.
True.
You don't remember Kent State. But you've heard of that, haven't you?
I don't even recall.
Kent State, this was Vietnam, and student campus protests were tremendous. And the students at Kent State in the spring of the year, girls, boys, both, were on campus protesting the Vietnam War. And there were a lot of them out there. And I guess they had National Guard. And they brought in the National Guard around them. And what's your telephone?
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's good? Yo, I'm not even like at the dorm. I'm at Wendy's. I'm gonna be back in about 10 or 15 minutes. Where
we'll finish up here.
Yeah, just chill. I'll be there in like 15 minutes. Alright, yeah, what's up? Yeah, hello? I'll be there in a second, man. Stop playing with me, please. Alright.
Well, I'll just finish this story and then we'll quit it. End up here. And anyway, at Kent State, the students were throwing stuff at them and yelling nasty words at them and everything. And they started shooting. And there were, I don't remember how many people killed, but there were several students shot and killed at Kent State.
Wow.
And, nobody wanted that to happen. I know 1 or 2 girls were killed, several guys were killed, and it was a terrible thing. But it was an example of the students were pretty out of hand, and the National Guard, young people too, were not trained. They were being harassed, and really they weren't trained how to handle that kind of a situation. And so gunshots were fired and people were killed. And that's why anybody that lived that period, everybody remembers Kent State because that was kind of a turning point in campus demonstrations and in how the National Guard and how the police handled those kind of things. So then you're right. They both need to take some responsibility and be trained and not come on. They need to know what to do.
Yes, come some type of compromise.
But it always seems like things have to come to a head before changes are made.
True.
You know?
I feel like they need to listen to the student voice.
Right.
You know, because in all honesty, that university makes like more than half the population of this town.
Oh yeah, it's
and
half of Macomb. Yeah, or maybe not quite, but it's a big share, and it's a very important economic aspect of Macomb. So
some type of compromise, like some type of maybe like an organized, picnic or something could be put in place, or just some other event,
right?
Some other event. But definitely.
Well, and the smaller parties too, because I live over west of campus, and there's a fraternity house and there's a sorority house over on that. A couple of them, I guess. At this point, I'm never quite sure which one's still a fraternity house and which one has closed up and just has people living in it. Because several of the fraternity houses have closed. I live